I'm still not used to this. Most of the time when I show up, people are running away. And you're not running? I could really get used to this. You see, for the longest time, people ran away whenever they saw me coming. And I didn't know how to respond to that except just get angry. So you probably want to know why I would think this, because you're probably not used to people running away from you when you show up. Well, it's a long story. They tell you that you ought to make a long story short, but I'm going to have a hard time with that, so I hope you'll indulge a crazy storyteller today. I'm not as crazy as I used to be. You see, I ran into Jesus one day. I can't even tell you that story very well without telling you the background even to that. You see, I am from a region that is on the eastern side of what you call the Sea of Galilee. It's called Gergasa, is what we called it. It means somebody who's coming back from a pilgrimage or from a fight. It's an appropriate word, actually, because, well, that happened a lot in my area. In fact, in the region I'm from, there were fights all the time for many centuries before my time. And at the time that we were living there, a lot of people were passing through on pilgrimages. So here's some background information on my area. We were really good at raising and selling pigs. And what people would do is they would buy pigs for offerings to Zeus. You see, there was a temple to Zeus about 90 kilometers away from where I lived. And people would be on the way to the temple, and they have to take an offering with them because Zeus loved his swine flesh. And so they would come and buy the pigs from us, wind up taking them down to where the temple was, and they would worship in the most disgusting and hideous of ways. I look back on it now, and I can't even believe I was ever a part of that. But they would make these sacrifices, and they would do their worship practices, and then they would go home. I remember as a kid doing that. I remember being taught about all of these stories about Zeus and his brother Hades and Poseidon. The Hades being the god of the underworld or the place of the dead, and Poseidon being the god of the sea. And where we lived, that was appropriate because we had all these people that believed that Zeus was the All-Father, the creator of life. People who believed that he was this just powerful god of lightning and thunder and all of the storms. And then we had all of the tombs that were around where we lived too. Makes sense that Hades would be in charge of that, place of the dead. And then you had this other place, the sea over here. You call it Lake Galilee. That would be the place for Poseidon to be in charge. So we were always surrounded by this stuff growing up and being taught this stuff as I was growing up. And there were all of these legends and fables and of all of these wars between the gods. And there was legends about Zeus that were quite interesting. We were taught about his exploits. Some of those exploits happened to be with, the lady gods. You see, he had a lot of little kid gods through a lot of different lady gods. One time, we were told he even had a child through a human mother. Imagine that. The All-Father, King of the gods, having a child with a human mother. That couldn't happen, could it? So we were taught about this, and this child was called Heracles. You might have heard the name Hercules before. And the story was told about his enormous strength. And as I was growing up, I wanted that kind of strength. Because Hercules, he was powerful and he was a hero. He fought off giants. In fact, when he was just a baby, Zeus's wife sent snakes, apparently, that's what we were told. I realize now it was all a lie. But we were told that snakes went into his crib to kill him, and Zeus, as a baby, grabbed them both by the neck and strangled them to death. We were told about him defeating the giants. We were even told about how he held the sky up for Atlas for a while so Atlas could take a break. And so I wanted to be him. And as I was growing up, I wanted to do whatever it took to get strong enough so that I was like the real-life Hercules, and I could be people's heroes that they needed at whatever time they needed it. I would do things to make myself stronger, but it never seemed to be strong enough. So what I did is I would pray to the gods to make me stronger, to make me the hero that I thought that they put me on earth to be. What I didn't realize is those were prayers that would come back to haunt me, that it made everything worse. I got stronger. It got to the point where I had to test my strength. And anytime I would see somebody that I thought maybe looked like they should be stronger than me, I would pick a fight. And I would win. Now you look at me, I don't look like the type of guy that would do that kind of thing. I'm not, like some big dude or anything. But I would start picking these fights with people and I would win. It got to the point where people were afraid of me. They did not want to be around me at all because I was constantly itching for it to prove myself that I could be the hero they were looking. How stupid is that? Picking fights with people you want to be their hero. But this is the kind of stuff that I was convinced I had to do, and now nobody wanted to be around me, and I realized I'm nobody's hero. I'm just everybody's villain now. I felt like a failure. I was a failure because the very people I had hoped to help didn't want anything to do with me. It was about that time I remember the voices starting in my head, telling me how lousy I was, what a failure I was, how terrible I was, and that nobody wanted to be around me. I just kept reminding myself of these truths that I perceived at the time, and those voices just got louder and louder the older I got, until it was just literally driving me crazy. And the only outlet I felt like I had was to keep trying to do what I was doing. They got to the point where they were trying to just literally tie me up somewhere. They started with ropes. And it seemed to work for a little while. But then that weird, otherworldly strength would come over me, and I would fight, and I would fight, and I would break those ropes. It hurt, by the way. Your body's really not supposed to do those kinds of things and be able to do that. But somehow I'm able to do it, even when I could feel that it was hurting my arms or my legs. Then they had to move to chains. That seemed to work for a little while. Now, nobody should be able to break chains, right? Once you're chained down, that ought to be it. But it got to the point where I was even breaking chains. I mean, how could that be? A human body's not supposed to be able to do those kinds of things. I remember being able to hear bones in my body breaking, but I couldn't stop. All that pain just rushing through my body, and I'm still going, and eventually even the chains would break. And I was in torture. It was awful. And so the only place that I could be was running around in the graveyard. That's the only place I could go because nobody wanted to go there. They were afraid of being in the graveyard, so that's the only place I could go. And I was angry. I was full of rage because everything that I thought I was supposed to be, I was not. I was a failure. I was worthless. And the voices kept telling me these things in my head over and over again until I just literally would start to get in arguments, I thought, with myself, but it was with the voices that were on my mind at the time. I would be running through those graveyards, literally screaming at the gods. Why, Zeus, why don't you just kill me? Because this isn't working. All that power you're supposedly giving me is just making things worse. Why, Hades, do I have to be sitting here in your realm? I didn't want to be here. It was interesting being there at that place where you could see the lake. Occasionally there were storms that would come up on the lake. They could come up there just like that, depending on the direction of the wind. It could be a nice day outside and it could go from nice to stormy in just a few minutes. And that happened a lot. There's a lot of people that are laying on the bottom of that lake because they were just there at the wrong time. One night, there was a really bad one. Those storms whipped up, and it seemed like the voices in my head were angrier and more full of rage than ever, screaming at me about how worthless and weak I really was. And I was screaming right back at them. And we were at a furious battle going on inside of my head as I'm yelling back at the voices, and they're yelling at me about how worthless and weak that I am. And it's going, and it's a fever pitch, and there's the storm out on the lake, and somewhere in my recesses of my brain I knew if there's anybody out there right now, they're goners. There's no way they can survive this. And then, just like that, the storm stopped. I could see that it was calm. I mean, how is it possible that a storm that furious could be gone just like that? It made no sense to me whatsoever, because also the storm in my brain stopped at the same time. And all of a sudden I look out on the lake and it's smooth as glass. I mean, if the wind stops on water, usually it takes a little while for the water to stop. But I looked out there, and the lake itself was glass smooth. And there was no more storm. More importantly to me, there's no more storm going in my mind, and I was finally able to just get some rest. I slept better that night than I've slept in many, many, many years before that. But then the dawn came. Then the voices came back, and they were just as loud, if not louder, than they've ever been. But it was different this time because they were now not screaming to me about how awful I was. It was like this, they were just screaming. It was fear I was hearing. It was panic. It was a nice day outside. It wasn't like there was a storm, but there's a panic going on in my brain that I could not get rid of. And I'm running around through the graveyard until I catch a glimpse of something and I stop in my tracks. Even with the voices in my head seemingly controlling me, it all of a sudden couldn't control me anymore. And I looked and I saw a group of men getting out of a boat. I was really drawn to that. And even though those voices and whatever it was inside of me being able to overpower me in the past, now it didn't work. And I felt a force that just was overwhelming, pulling me closer to the boat to see what it was that was going on there. I kept getting closer. The voices in my head were still screaming in panic, but I kept getting closer. And I saw that it was a Jewish rabbi and all of his disciples getting out of that boat. Now I realized that if this is a Jewish rabbi and his disciples, they had to have come from the other side of the lake because there was no Jews that lived around where we were because, it's pig farming land and they don't do that. So I knew that they had to come from the other side of the lake. And that meant that they had to probably have been out in that storm. But here they were, alive. That means they must have been out there when that storm stopped. I would come to find out later there was something on that boat more powerful than the storm. Anyway, I got a little bit closer, and I saw I saw the rabbi. It's the kindest, but yet most strength in any face I've ever seen. Not the kind of strength that I wanted, but this, just a strength that I can't describe it to you. But I found myself being thrown down at his feet like I had no control over the situation whatsoever. And I heard the voice of that rabbi saying, "Unclean spirit, get out of him." Now those voices were super panicked. It's like it was panic on steroids. I didn't know what steroids were back then. And they were just super panicked, and they were in so much fear. And I heard those voices coming out of my mouth now saying, "What do you want to do with us, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you, by God, do not torture us." Torture us. All those years torturing me. And now they can't stand when the tables are turned. Don't torture us. Jesus, very calmly, looked through me, looked into me, and said, "What's your name?" Somehow I knew he wasn't actually talking to me. "What's your name?" And I heard those voices come out of me one more time. "My name is Legion because we are many." Well, that made sense finally why there were so many voices in my head. And I heard Legion say the last thing that he ever said out of me, "Don't send us out of the country. Send us into the pigs that are up there on the hill right now." It's the last thing I heard them say out of my mouth. And Jesus gave them permission. "All right, go, make it quick." And I all of a sudden, again, cast down on the ground, and everything that was in my head was almost instantly gone. I was exhausted, just laying there, face on the dirt. And I all of a sudden just felt weak and exhausted, and I do remember hearing the loud squealing of pigs, and I remember hearing loud splashes in the lake. I do remember also hearing some other panicked voices. The voices of pig herders that were now running towards town to tell everybody what they'd seen happen. I was sitting there helpless when I felt a warm hand on my shoulder. And in that moment, my real strength returned. Not that weird, demonic, supernatural strength, but real strength. That was life strength coming back into my body. And I looked up into that kind face. I looked up into that face I'll never forget. And he just simply said to me, "Son, you don't have to go back to those lies ever again. Because the real Son of God and Son of Man is setting you free." I realize now that all of those lies that we'd been told all of those years in that part of the world, that the real enemy of souls was just using those stories against us to make us miserable. Well, those people that ran into town came back. And I thought they would be happy for me. I thought they would be overwhelmed with awe that that crazy old naked guy running through the graves is now fine. And he's in his right mind now, fully clothed, just sitting there with Jesus. I thought maybe they would make a connection that Jesus was the one that had set me free and that something would happen inside of them that was different, but no. They actually asked Jesus to leave. They were afraid of him. I really think what they were afraid of is the fact that they were about to lose all of their profits from selling those pigs to people, which just allowed them to stay in their misery. More concerned about their profits and worshiping Zeus and all of these other gods than caring about the man that was set free. I hope I never act like that. So Jesus honored their request because that's what he does. He doesn't force anybody to accept him. So Jesus was getting in the boat with his disciples to go back over across the lake. And I ran after him because I can't stay here. In my mind at that time, there's no way I can stay here. I've been surrounded by all of this garbage all of my life. I've got to get away. I now know that all of these false gods were a lie, that the devil was just using to kill me. I remembered throwing myself against rocks and cutting myself because it was just so miserable. And I remembered that I had to get away from this. Jesus said, no, I need you to stay. At first, that really hurt. But then he said, I need you to stay because I need you to tell your friends about this. Tell them that I've set you free. Tell them the story. Tell them that the Lord has had mercy on you. All those years, Zeus, Hades, Poseidon, all of those gods, and they never showed any mercy. But Jesus had mercy on me. So that's what I did. I stayed. I started to tell my friends. I didn't even really have friends at the time. Nobody wanted to be around me, remember? So I just went to the first person that would even tolerate me. And I told him what happened. Now that person remembered the crazy guy wandering around through the graves. He remembered me. But all of a sudden, I'm sane, I'm lucid, I am speaking things that make sense, and I'm speaking about something powerful. And he listened. And he just could not believe what he heard. He was compelled to go and tell one of his friends. I was compelled to go tell somebody else that would put up with my story for a little while. Until pretty soon I actually had friends again. And that story just kept spreading and it kept spreading and it kept spreading. It's interesting that hundreds of years later, there was a church that was built on the site where they used to farm pigs. And that church was for the worship of the true God. I understand that these days, people are digging up excavation sites to look for ruins for Zeus's temple because they're broken down and gone. But I understand that the church that started, all the borders that would have kept them in one place, they've been broken. And now that church is all over the world. I mean, is that not powerful? So what about you? What's your story? How's God set you free? How has He calmed the storms in your life? How has He turned your place of death, your graves, if you will, into a garden of life? Has He done that for you? Are you telling anyone about it? Because if you aren't, there's a lot of people that need to hear that story. And I would also just say, if you need storms in your life to be calmed, if you need to have your life restored to you, if you need to have your place of death, your graves turned into God's garden of life, He's the only one. Jesus is the only one who can do it. That's my story. I hope Jesus has a story for you too. That's the story of a demoniac. But you can have a story too. You can have an encounter with Jesus too. You can be able to tell somebody one day that you ran into Jesus. I want to sing this song to you, Graves into Gardens, and I'd even say if you know it, please feel free to join me. If you don't know it and you learn it along the way, feel free to join along the way. This is a song that Brandon Lake, Chris Brown, Stephen Furtick, Tiffany Hammer wrote together, done by Elevation Worship. And it's just very meaningful to me because it's about Jesus that turns mourning to dancing, who gives beauty for ashes, he turns shame into glory, and graves into gardens. The only one who can do that. I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise and treasures that fade are never enough. You came along and put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing is better than you. And I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley, and there's not a place mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into gardens. You turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing is better than you. Thank you, Lord Jesus, for turning our graves into your garden of life. Thank you for transforming people. For anyone who needs transformation in their life, may you enter their lives, calm their storms. May you free them. May you turn that grave into a garden. You're the only one who can do it. We love you. We can't wait to see you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. God bless you. We'll see you next week right back here.